Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Angela Greiling-Keene. I'm a reporter for Bloomberg News and the 106th president of the National Press Club. We are the world's leading professional organization for journalists, committed to our profession's future with programming such as this, while fostering a free press worldwide. For more information about the National Press Club, please visit our website at www.press.org. To donate to programs offered to the public through our National Press Club Journalism Institute, please visit press.org/institute. On behalf of our members worldwide, I would like to welcome our speaker today, as well as those of you in our audience. Our head table includes guests of our speaker, as well as working journalists who are club members. And if you hear applause in our audience, I'd note that members of the general public are also attending, so it's not necessarily evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences. You can follow the action today on Twitter using the hashtag NPCLunch. After our guest speech concludes, we'll have a question and answer period. I will ask as many questions as time permits. Now it's time to introduce our head table. I would ask each of you to stand briefly as your name is announced. From your right, William Wilkins, Executive Director of TRIP, the Road Information Program. Marilyn Giwax, Senior Business Editor for NPR and a member of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Thomas Burr, Washington Correspondent for the Salt Lake Tribune and the Chairman of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Gabe Nelson, Washington Correspondent for Automotive News. David Shepardson, Washington Bureau Chief for the Detroit News. Selim Bingle, General Motors Vice President of Global Communications and Public Policy. Allison Fitzgerald, Finance and Investigative Reporter at the Center for Public Integrity and the Chairwoman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee. Skipping over our speaker for just a moment, Danny Selnick, Vice President at Business Wire and the member of the Speakers Committee who organized today's lunch. Thank you, Danny. Thank you. Jerry Zremski, Washington Bureau Chief for the Buffalo News and a former National Press Club President. Nairi Wright, Senior Vice President at MSL Group. John Hughes, editor at Bloomberg's First Word and the treasurer of the National Press Club. Michael Lindenberger, Washington correspondent for the Dallas Morning News. And putting an American automaker on top for the first time in 27 years. GM cars and trucks have won accolades from Consumer Reports and Motor Trend. Before joining GM, Mr. Akerson was a managing director and head of global buyout for the Carlyle Group here in Washington, and served as CEO or president of several telecommunications and technology companies, including MCI, Nextel Communications, XO Communications, and General Instrument. Please join me in giving a warm National Press Club welcome to General Motors Chairman and CEO Dan Akerson.
Thank you, Angela. And many thanks to the National Press Club for inviting me to speak. This is an auspicious time to speak to an audience of reporters. As you may have heard, GM's been in the news a lot lately. Last week, the transformation of passed two important major milestones. First, as Angela mentioned, the United States Treasury sold its last share of General Motors stock, closing a remarkable 5-year chapter in American business history. That got some media attention. Then the next day, we announced that Mary Barra will become the next CEO. That did not go unnoticed either. On that day, for the first time in decades, all eyes at General Motors turned toward the future. The end of Government Motors era has cleared the way for General Motors to truly soar forward, and soar we will. We are building a GM that America can once again be proud of. It's not been easy. The path forward for Mary and the team will not be easy either. The enormity of the task became crystal clear when I became CEO. The new GM was, in a word, fragile. We'd emerged from bankruptcy that lasted only 39 days. That was good because we did not do irreparable damage to our brands or to our dealer networks. But a 39-day quick rinse bankruptcy only gave us time to repair the debt side of our balance sheet. Truly transforming a business would take much, much more. We had to remedy decades of poor decisions, indecisions, and sadly, no decisions that started to pile up in the 70s and 80s like so much rotting firewood. I categorized the problems we faced into 3 broad buckets. They were out of control cost, wasteful complexity, and diminished quality funded by ruinous debt. You could pick almost any point in time and find something to shake your head over. For example, in 1978, General Motors paid almost as much in benefits as it earned in net income. Yet the very same next year, the company agreed to the largest pension increase in UAW history. Eventually, General Motors pensions, in aggregate, the largest in the world, became chronically and dangerously underfunded, despite tens of billions of dollars in cash and stock infusions to make it whole. These actions, although well-intentioned, actually weakened the company because they treated the symptoms and not the disease, robbing precious dollars for product development. More recently, U.S. hourly cost increased to an average of 4% annually from 2003 to 2007, even though the company had total operating losses of $17.5 billion from 2005 to 2007. In other words, while management was figuratively burning furniture to keep warm, we were also automatically increasing our fixed cost. Complexity was everywhere in the business. Just a few short years ago, General Motors had more than 30 different vehicle architectures supporting sales of about 9 million vehicles worldwide. And then the ridiculous. The company had almost 70 different advertising agencies around the world just to support the Chevrolet brand. It's staggering, but it also shows how we lost focus and we lost our advantage, economies of scale. In another move, GM leaders outsourced nearly all of the company's information technology. We effectively dismissed data capture and proprietary analytics as a core competency, just as the internet was about to transform all modern business models. We also ended up with 23 leased or partially owned data centers, which is not only costly, but risky. We are now insourcing our IT, growing it as a core competency. Those 23 data centers will be reduced to 2, which will increase our performance, our reliability, and our cost. At one point in time, we could barely close our own books in a timely manner because various units in the company were on different general ledgers. And for those of you that are financially trained, that's Finance 101. The list goes on. We all know what happened next. The company that topped the Fortune 500 when it first was listed in 1955 and stayed there for 35 years fell into disgrace. Something even more sobering, GM had lost sight of its customers and what they truly valued: quality, compelling design, and reliability. In my heart of hearts, I knew GM was fixable if the new leadership team played team ball and systematically addressed the company's shortcomings. So I made a promise to myself and to the board to deliver on 3 important initiatives in my tenure. The first was the restoration of GM's good name. Second, the transformation of the company's basic operations. My third goal was to put quality and the customer back at the center of every decision we made. As a result, at every aspect of our business, every angle we took was to make every system and every operation best in class. We didn't set out to become competitive. We didn't come out to be average. We wanted to be best in class. For example, we've committed $3 billion of our precious fortress balance sheet to build our U.S. dealerships and create the best customer sales and service experience in the industry. We've reduced the time it takes to resolve complex customer issues from 28 days to a week. And it's our objective to get it down to 1 day. We're launching the industry's largest deployment of 4G LTE mobile broadband to bring the analog cars of today into the digital world. We're investing more than $500 million to build an information technology capability that would make Silicon Valley proud. We've invested more than $4 billion to grow GM Financial around the world. Soon we'll be able to provide financing in markets that account for 80% of our sales on a global basis. We have been the patent board's automotive innovation leader for years, decades, and yet we were slow to commercialize our intellectual property. We're now innovating for the benefit of our customers. I'll give you a good example. Reducing the weight of our cars will improve our mileage fuel economy to meet the new, more demanding standards. That means we're going to have to use more aluminum. Some may be engineers in this group. No one's ever figured out how to weld aluminum. We have. We've patented it, and today we're going to be able to use more aluminum less steel in such things as cars, car doors, where typically the industry used pop rivets. In fact, pop rivets in aluminum, you see them in airplanes and cars. In a car, the average car has about 25 pounds of pop rivets in it. We no longer have to do that. It takes complexity out of our assembly lines. It reduces investment, lightweights the cars, and gives us competitive advantage. We revamped our financial systems from stem to stern, top to bottom. We're now getting to the point where we can take and understand profitability on each car by VIN number, no matter where it's manufactured or where it's sold around the globe. Heretofore, we weren't even able to figure out product line profitability because we had little fiefdoms, different general ledgers around the globe. On the product front, we'll reduce the number of vehicle architectures by half within the decade. We've also defeased some $40 billion of our pension liabilities. We've doubled our revolving line of credit, and we've dramatically simplified our balance sheet. Even more important, we've worked hard to earn the trust of our employees, both hourly and salaried, and get everyone aligned on straightforward profit and quality targets. Today, for example, when a salaried employee gets a bonus, hourly workers get a profit share. We're aligned. We're not at odds with one another any longer. I could keep on going, but I think you get the picture. We've been trying to fix this airplane while in air and done, I think, a credible job. The bottom line results of all this work has been encouraging. We had a $21.3 billion IPO, the largest in U.S. history at the time. We've generated over $604 billion in global automotive revenue since our reorganization in 2009. We've had 15 profitable quarters in a row and earned nearly $30 billion in EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes. We've announced more than $9 billion in capital investments in U.S. facilities. We've returned to the S&P 100 and S&P 500, and we've regained our investment grade rating from Moody's. And there's much more to come. I'm sure that Mary Barra and her team will continue the momentum. All of this is good for our employees, our investors, our industry, and our country. But none of it will matter for much if we go back to business as usual. That's why it was critical to put the customer back in the center of every decision we make. I keep returning to this theme because it's what the world's strongest brands do. They embrace the customer as foundational. This is the biggest cultural change that we've been able to infuse into the new GM. I think our products tell this story best. It was only a few years ago that President Obama rhetorically asked, "Why can't they make a Corolla?" Please. Well, no one's asking that anymore. Today, we're taking on the best vehicles in the world and winning with products like the Cadillac CTS and Chevrolet Impala. We're re-entering new product segments like mid-sized trucks that our domestic competitors have abandoned to the Japanese. And our trophy case is filling with quality awards. In fact, we became the first and only American automaker to top J.D. Power's initial quality study, ever. Consumer Reports ranked the Chevrolet Impala and Silverado as the best sedan and truck you can buy. Just last week, Auto Week magazine named the Corvette and the Silverado as the best of the best. Now that's okay, but it's the first time that one manufacturer ever won both categories in the same year. The Cadillac ATS is the 2013 North American Car of the Year, and its stablemate, the 2014 CTS, which was Motor Trend's Car of the Year, named last month, is up for Best North American Car for 2014. That'll be named next month. I anxiously await the outcome. It's an embarrassment of riches that, quite frankly, I'm not embarrassed about. Good as all this sounds, the truth is we are still in the early chapters of our comeback story, and we have a lot to prove, especially to those who left us for other brands. The only way to bring them back is to keep making cars, trucks, and crossovers which are world-class quality, reliability, durability, and compelling designs. That's a big commitment, and it costs a lot of money. We're in a capital-intensive business that demands steady and significant investment regardless of economic up and downs. Today, we're taking another step forward by announcing new investments totaling $1.3 billion in 5 U.S. plants. This will bring our 4-year total of announced investments in our U.S. plants to more than $10 billion. There's that $10 billion again. But we're investing it that will keep paying dividends to the Americans, the American public that supported this company in its darkest hour. This investment will be spread from Detroit to our birthplace city of Flint, Michigan, and to hardworking communities like Romulus, Michigan, Toledo, Ohio, and Bedford, Indiana. About 7,500 people work in these cities, these plants. And today's announcement will create or retain more than another 1,100 jobs in America. That brings our total of new and retained jobs to more than 26,000, thanks to reinvestment in our plants in the United States. As you can imagine, this is welcome news in these communities, places where hope and optimism were in short supply just 5 years ago. Thanks to the swift and courageous action by 2 different administrations, the entire U.S. industry is back. Rather than allowing the industry to collapse and turn the Great Recession into another Great Depression, our nation stood by us. We come to work every day determined to restore GM as the American standard bearer in the global automotive industry. Someone asked me recently if the government motors tag still hurts us. To be honest, we don't hear it much anymore. It reminds me of a comment attributed to Ronald Reagan. He said he knew his economic plan was working when they stopped calling it Reaganomics. Well, GM is working again. We've put together a leadership team with experience, optimism, and a strong competitive streak. We're making vehicles that are the pride of the industry. When I became CEO, I wanted to help build a sound foundation for the next generation of leaders to build on. I cannot wait to see how far they can take it. I think it's going to be great. Thank you, and I'd be glad to take any questions you might have.
Thank you. President Obama predicted that the auto bailout would make money, and of course it did not, and it didn't just involve GM. We all know Chrysler received money as well. You mentioned the $10 billion that GM gained and the taxpayers didn't gain back. Do you think that GM should repay the taxpayers that money directly?
Well, first let me contrast something there. The Center for Automotive Research estimates that between not having to pay for unemployment, social cost in the various communities in the Midwest in particular, and lost tax revenue, that there was actually about a $36 to $38 billion gain. Not included in those calculations, we had a $26 billion pension deficit that's never thrown into those calculations that would have gone on to the PBGC's account, and the federal government would have had to foot that. That's never brought into the calculation. That being said, One of the advantage I have is I wasn't there. So when you go through a bankruptcy court, having come out of private equity, everybody kind of takes a haircut at the table. And we've paid back all the debt and the preferred the government gave us. They took an equity interest. They could have cast the bankruptcy differently. They could have made low interest loans, for example. They didn't. They were taking a ride, just like you do when you buy stock. And we have new shareholders. We went to the market and we sold tens of billions of dollars of equity. When you come in, you're buying that stock based upon how that's racked and stacked and who owns what and who's taking what risk. To go back and pay that back, I can tell you there would be shareholder suits that would be difficult to defend. So the die was cast back in '09. It played out, I think, for the national good. Why seed an industry that really, as I mentioned, for many years, there were decisions, no decisions, bad decisions. All that's in large measure been rectified. And the automotive industry in this country is somewhere between 3.5% and 4% of the total GDP. To have ceded that to foreign competition, in my opinion, as an American, would have been a serious mistake. So I would not accept the premise that this was a bad deal.
GM, of course, had applied for low-interest loans from the government and then rescinded the application before a decision was made on that. How would GM be different today if you had gone through and received those loans from DOE?
Yeah. Actually, that was one of my first actions. I figured we'd taken enough from the government. We were either going to stand on our own two legs or not. And we turned those loans down and decided to go. In fact, some of our competition are actually more in debt to the federal government in terms of almost $6 or $7 billion than we are. So maybe that's a question you ought to ask someone of our competition. Ford.
The invitation to Mr. Mullally to be a National Press Club speaker stands. Questioner asks, why did GM deserve the taxpayer money and not, say, Filene's Basement or Reader's Digest or maybe Hostess, which got a lot of attention for its bankruptcy?
Well, as I said, I think the automotive industry, in my opinion, great countries do several things really well. I think they manufacture and add value, and they grow their food to a large measure. And they're traders. They're international traders. And when an industry such as ours, and believe me, there are very few countries in the world that don't help their key manufacturing sectors. Believe me, I see it every day when we compete against them, whether it be in Europe or Asia, it's there. The question is, was it a good investment? Was the automotive industry more central to the prosperity of this country than Hostess Twinkies or cupcakes? I would argue these are high-paying jobs in communities that the government, I think, had a compelling interest to invest in. And as I said, whether you take my perspective on it or the Center for Automotive Research, I think net-net it was a positive for the U.S. economy.
Will GM have an easier time recruiting executives now that government pay restrictions are no longer in effect?
I don't know. When we've recruited a very good team, and I will tell you, it wasn't about money. It was about being part of the transformation of a once great company and restoring it back to great. And not everybody works just for money. I didn't come to General Motors for a paycheck. I came because, A, it was an interesting business paradigm, business situation, probably the most challenging and interesting in my generation, but more importantly because what this country represented to this economy and to this nation. And I don't think that pay was a factor not only for myself, for any of the senior executives. That said, our competition is seeing what we're doing. I mean, I've hired a number of people from some of our European competitors. They thought we would come out of the gate back in 2009 and fail. They thought they were prescient. They thought we were going to be the 2009 version of the healthcare program. It didn't, and it was tough. There were many long nights and hard work, and we aren't done yet, but it has been one of the best business experiences for our team one that I think they'll remember for the rest of their life. So yeah, I do think we're going to have to pay better because now we're viewed as attractive again, and we have a lot of really young, capable executives.
How has the bailout affected the culture of GM?
I don't think the bailout allowed us the opportunity to change the culture of the company, to put the customer at the core of everything we do, to focus on what's important. The prior administrations, the prior executive teams, it was a point of comedy. It was a health care plan. It was a retirement plan attached to an automotive company, and decisions were made of how to fund the health care plan or the retirement plans and take money from rob Peter to pay Paul, and we were robbing from product development, which kept us competitive to the point where the goose couldn't lay any more golden eggs. So now that we've got the structure of the company properly stated, we have a fortress balance sheet. We're focusing on profitability of the core business and at the same time focusing on brands, and we're focusing on marketing. We're a hardcore business again. We're not a healthcare plan or a retirement plan, although we still are one of the biggest, I think we're still the biggest private pension plan in the world.
One of the things that was agreed to in the restructuring was that the UAW agreed to a two-tiered wage system. Tell us how that's working out with new UAW represented hires working alongside veteran employees who are getting paid more than the new workers are.
Well, let me kind of cast it this way. Before I was actually active on the payroll, I went to Solidarity House and met with the UAW leadership. And I thought we needed to open up a new chapter in industrial relations, that the past could not be prologue or we would both fail again. And there's nothing like a crisis to bring focus to a particular issue. And what I asked was, and the Washington Post in an editorial said I was either a neophyte or a visionary, and they tended to gravitate to neophyte, thought my idea of no increases for 4 years would never be accepted by the UAW. Well, I went to dinner with the UAW leadership every month for almost a year and kept working it and tried to sell my vision, and said, basically, we will link management bonuses. Now, the top 100 aren't eligible for bonuses in our company during government ownership, but the rest of the management was. We would link management bonuses to UAW profit share. Instead of arguing for a 1 or 2% or 3% cost of living, but let's really share the profits, and it's going to be tied to performance and quality. Keep me here. I mean, quality is a new hallmark, a center point of our initiatives, and they have prospered under that. I think one year they got $6,500, much more than a 1 or 2%, 3%, 4% raise would have entailed. And I also tried to, total transparency, there'll be good years and there'll be bad years. There'll be years that there aren't bonuses, and there'll be years that there won't be profit share. But we had to get people aligned, because you can't have people going like this. And so whether it's tier 1 or tier 2, we had to get our labor cost on an hourly rate when we looked at foreign transplants in non-union states, largely in the South, such that at the end of this 4-year period, this 4-year contract, that our hourly cost in the plants were going to be equal to or less than our foreign competition. The UAW is a business partner today. They're a business partner today. They're at the table. And they understand if we're not there, we're not going to be competitive. So you can argue over 2 or 3% raise, or you can have no job. That's the reality that everyone has to face. And it was tough. We had to rejigger our own retirement plans for management too. And we had people still on defined benefit plan. The whole management had to go to defined contribution. That was very unpopular. We've had to make a lot of unpopular decisions here, but people in the company know we're making decisions for the long-term longevity of the company, the prosperity of the company, and you got buy-in, whether it was union or salaried. And I would say it was a rough couple first years for me, for the management team, but I would tell you, I think the employee base, hourly or salaried, is unified in the purpose here.
You mentioned that the news out of Treasury last week got a little bit of attention. Do you plan any marketing or advertising campaigns around that? Maybe roll out something during the Super Bowl?
I don't think people eating tacos and chili are going to pay much attention to a thank you to the American taxpayer. I might be wrong on that, but we don't have anything planned right now. We may do something, but it wouldn't be within the Super Bowl atmosphere.
Salaried retirees at Delphi have been waging a very public campaign for years now in which they contend they were cheated out of a large share of their pensions. For this, they blame government negotiators involved in their restructuring. What is your take on that? Do Delphi salaried retirees have a legitimate gripe? And if so, where should the blame lie?
Well, I'm going to address that question in the following manner. That was done well before I arrived. Prior to the bankruptcy, bankruptcy courts make tough calls, but the facts are the following. Delphi was spun out 10 years before we went into bankruptcy. It was a fully funded pension plan, and that company ran their own pension plan, and we ran our own pension plan. And a lot of companies are spun off. And that's where the court's decision along that line, and I won't argue the merits, I'm not a lawyer, but I know it's a very volatile subject, but again, I wasn't there when the decision was made. I wasn't there when the Delphi was spun out, but I know it was spun out with a fully funded pension plan at the time, 10 years prior to bankruptcy.
What does the future hold for former Delphi facilities that are now again part of GM, such as the former Delphi facility in Lockport, New York? Are they on secure ground, or will GM have to make further cuts and consolidations in its operations?
I have no idea on a specific plant basis, and if I did, I wouldn't comment here.
Looking to your successor, some have downplayed the significance of Mary Barra being the first female CEO of a major automaker, but it's a big deal. What do you see as the significance of having a woman in that job?
I haven't read anything that downplayed it personally, but nor do I think it should be. I think it is noteworthy. I think it's historic. I think Mary Barra was picked purely on her talents, hard work, and her success. Nothing else, not because of her gender. And I'm proud of the history that General Motors has in terms of promoting qualified minority and female employees. We do that because of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math graduates coming out of colleges. About 20 to 25% of our plants in this country are run by women. The young woman, I don't know exactly how old she is, but that runs our manufacturing engineering, the folks that are in the plants that are actually, you get into a plant, it is complex. Woman who runs our supply chain purchasing, global purchasing, supply chain management, a woman. Our quality initiatives and customer experience, woman. These are all ladies that serve on the executive committee. We're proud of that. So I'm not surprised that Mary rose to the top. She has been with the company for, I believe, 30 plus years, graduated from GMI. Think of GMI like you would West Point or Annapolis. General Motors back doesn't run it anymore. Had their own service academy, if you will. And she went to Stanford, did her MBA, and came back to the company, has performed exemplary. So I think it's noteworthy. I think it should be, and I think she was well deserving of the appointment.
Your announcement today is about the $1.3 billion invested around the U.S. A questioner asks about plans to increase investment globally.
Well, between product development and capital expenditures, this will shock you, we spend $15 billion a year. So when we spend $1.3 billion. I know that sounds like a big number, and it is, but in the grand scheme, we're doing that around the globe as we see business opportunities and likelihood of success. And so we're going to continue to invest at this rate. And one of the things when we came into this thing, we were so burdened with debt when we borrowed money. We borrowed $20 billion one time to invest, to put into our pension funds because they weren't performing, and we were underfunded. Now, what we do is we have a fortress balance sheet. We have when we went into bankruptcy, I think we had $40+ billion in debt. Now we have liquid position of about $37 billion in cash. And of course, the shareholders are saying that's too much. We've got to balance that against what we need as a fortress balance sheet so we we used to have the start-stop. We'd see these economic downturns, we'd start cutting our product development budgets. And so coming out of a recession or coming out of a dip, we'd be short on new product, on new quality product. We want to be able to invest, power through, if you will, economic ups and downs, such that we're consistently, when we come out of a downturn, that we'll have a strong product portfolio. So we are going to continue to invest, whether it be at the plant level or into new product, and we've got to maintain that balance sheet, that it's strong and not compromise it. We're in a capital-intensive, cyclical industry that in large measure is determined by long-range planning. We've got to think out 10, 20, 30 years to make sure that we're competitive.
GM has invested $500 million in its Arlington, Texas facilities. Questioner asks, why such a big bet in Texas and why on SUVs in particular?
Well, I think Willie Sutton said it. Why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why do we invest in this particular plant? We make SUVs there, and SUVs are highly profitable. All of our plants turn a profit, but we want to be in all segments of the market, whether it be in subcompact or in large trucks. And Arlington is one of 5 truck and SUV plants that we have in North America, 1 in Mexico and 4 in the United States. This is the last one to get the capital upgrade to produce the new, what we call K2XX platform.
Looking a different direction, how long will it take for Chinese cars to become like the Japanese market and start capturing a share here? Is this process taking longer than you might expect it to?
That's a difficult question. The Chinese market is the largest market in the world. Where our market's growing in single digits, low single digits, theirs is growing. And the first year I was in the job, going back 4 years ago, was growing like 30%. This year it'll probably grow about 7.5 multiples of what this market is growing. So I don't think they feel the need. I don't want to speak for Chinese manufacturers, but I think it was a different time and different place, different economic set of circumstances back in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s when the Japanese came into this market. There's no question in my mind, though, over the next 20 or 30 years, there'll be 1 or 2 global Chinese champions that will come out of the domestic market. It's only a matter of time. Our partner there, we have 2 partnerships with Shanghai Auto. It's robust, it's strong, and we have the lead market share jointly in China. We hope to hold that, grow it, and it's been a very robust partnership and one that we value and cherish.
Speaking of Japan, of course, Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations are ongoing. There's hang-ups including safety and other regulatory issues. What kinds of provisions do you expect to see if an agreement is reached in those bilateral talks, and is a currency provision necessary to close a deal?
Well, for those of you who travel to China or Japan, I was on a Japanese board for 3 years, and I could count the number of American cars I saw in 3 years on 2 hands. There's not an American manufacturer in Japan. And throughout Asia, the Japanese yen is weakened to the point where they have a 20% advantage, not only versus the United States, not only versus the dollar, but other major currencies, to include the Korean won and the euro. The United States at times has been called, because of our fiscal policies, has been called a fiscal monetary manipulator. I wouldn't necessarily attach that to Japan, but there's a lot of monkey business going on here. So that is an important part of the TPP, and one that I think needs to be watched very, very carefully.
Here in Washington, auto regulator David Strickland announced last week that he's stepping down. What is your assessment of his tenure?
Well, I think our cars have gotten nothing but safer, and I think that transcends political party or administration. I think the NHTSA has done a good job, and I think Mr. Strickland did a fine job.
Any idea where he's going to land next?
I don't think he's going to come to General Motors to work. Like I said, I think he did a fine job, and I think he's got a career that, I mean, I've met him on occasion, but I don't know him personally. But I think public service, quite frankly, is unappreciated in this country, and there are public servants that do great work, highly unappreciated, and I think he's one of those that did a good job.
What about the future of electric vehicles in the U.S. market? Obviously, Volt sales haven't been what GM once hoped they would be, but you're still in that market. Where do you see electric vehicles going, both for GM and for the U.S. market more broadly?
Okay, because I know the press loves to make hay on this, and there's certain people at this table would have, right, David? Volt will sell more Volts this year than Jaguar will sell cars in this market. We'll sell more Volts in this market than 4 out of 5 Audi models will sell in this market. There are 230 odd different. We're right in the middle in terms of Volts. So there are a lot of cars that aren't selling as well as a Volt. Not that this is a sore subject, but this car is a step forward. You know, I hear about other cars that have had fires and things of that nature. We've never had a fire with a Volt, never. We were able to start one in a test sense. We crashed it, T-boned it. We didn't drain the gas out of it. We didn't drain the electric battery. Never had an accident. We've had something like 150 million car miles. Never. We've T-boned them, had them totaled, not one. They're safe, A. B, you don't have range anxiety. In other words, you have an onboard generator. You can take that car, you can drive it from Washington to LA and back and not worry about it. And you say, well, why aren't people? Well, 80% of Americans drive 40 miles or less per day. That car will run 40 miles without a charge. Pretty damn good. I have one. I've got 12,000 miles on it. I've put less than $75 of gas in it in 2.5 years. So it provides the utility I want, but it keeps the air clean. And if I want to drive it, if I want the utility of driving it for long distances, I can without worrying about range anxiety. So this is the future, because think about, let's say we could develop a car that goes 100 miles on a charge or 200 miles on a charge and has an onboard gas generator. We've got to get the nomenclature right. It's electrical. Because I know there aren't a lot of electrical engineers probably in the crowd, but engines produce alternating current. You have to run it to an inverter, convert it to DC, direct current, to charge that battery. That saves emissions, CO2, it saves gas. This is a great car. And we're going to come out with a new one here this month called the ELR, which is a Cadillac, not unlike the Volt. And we're working on more advanced versions of this type architecture and all electric cars. So yeah, I do think it has a future, because battery technologies just in my last 3.5, 4 years has gotten better. It's going to get better. There are going to be breakthroughs, and you know, you got to be there early and often, and you can't be an interloper that shows up 10 years later and says, hey, where were you when the party started? We're here early.
As you alluded to, after the post-crash test fire in the Volt, GM was subject to NHTSA investigation, congressional hearing, et cetera. You didn't name names, but I will. Tesla has not been hauled before Congress at this point, although there is an open NHTSA investigation. Do you think that there should be more attention right now being paid to those post-crash Tesla fires?
You know, I think companies should be judged on how they handle crises. And when we had in a NHTSA test, and there was a question about the safety of the car. And it was reported in the Wall Street Journal. I said, this was our Tylenol moment. We offered to buy back any car. We offered to give a replacement while we tested it. We crashed 8 other cars, same circumstance. They did, we did. We could not replicate it. And for those of you that are science majors, or engineering majors, if you have 9 experiments and you get 1 over here and 8 over here, you tend to believe that. Well, we stuck with it. We kept, we had the battery taken out of the car. We pierced it with a 1/8-inch spear. We put it on a spit. We broke the seal, like if you had a glass of water and you suck up the water, put your finger on it, pull it out, take your finger off, it falls out. That's the type seal we had on the battery, encased battery. We broke the seal, continued to spill coolant onto the battery, and rotated it in 90-degree arcs. And it took a week before it started to arc. So the testimony that I was called to give, it was the question, it wasn't about us, ostensibly. It was, did NHTSA do their job properly? That's what, but it was really, there was a political agenda, there's no question about that. But the fact that we handled it so much differently than other car companies. We offered to buy them back, we offered replacements, and then we went in and we put additional buttressing to shed the load if we were to take a hit, a major head-on or a side T-bone as they call it. And that car, like I said, I think 150 million miles. And I think sell them 75,000 on the road today, something like that. Not one fatality, not one fire. And we're proud of the safety record. It never lost its 5-star safety record, I might add. We only improved the quality of the safety. So I have no comment about what NHTSA should do or what Tesla should do, but I do think it's interesting in a politically charged environment. And by the way, this is not President Obama's car. This car was conceived back in 2007. I think he was still in the Senate. And it wasn't my car, although I'm proud of it. And I do think this car is, I think it's a huge step forward. I'll tell you what, there are a lot of other companies that are interested in this, and I'm glad we have it in the portfolio, and we'll develop it further.
What do you think of Tesla's, or specifically Elon Musk's, strategy of dealing with the regulator on this issue? It's pretty different from the GM strategy that you just outlined.
There were many things I wanted to change when I came to General Motors, and one of them was whether it be a safety issue, climate, we were going to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. There are different points of view on every controversy that you run across in the world. And you can't just fold your arms and say, well, that's not the way I see it. Engage in the dialogue and try to come up with an acceptable solution that makes sense, the best. So that's the General Motors approach to the problem, and others will have different approaches to it.
What about self-driving cars, which of course GM is developing along with lots of your competitors? Are they overhyped, or are they going to be part of our future car market here in the US and around the world?
Well, we already, for those of you that are fortunate enough to drive GM cars, you can get active cruise control, which at first kind of puts you off. You come up on a car and you might think you should be only 100 feet back, but you can set your settings. It says, no, you're good. It'll start to slow you down. It'll actually stop the car. In fact, backing out of my garage, every once in a while, it thinks I'm a little too close to the side. It stops me, which is a little bit unnerving. That being said, I think you'll see self-driving cars in the right circumstances. I can't imagine, quite frankly, and maybe I'm just old and don't understand, but in a crowded urban environment where a child chasing a ball could dart in front of you, I can think of 100 examples that I'd want to have some positive control by a human. If you're on the road going 70 miles an hour, 65 miles an hour, whatever the speed limit is, you know, you ought to be able to, but we have that. that technology exists today where you can be sitting talking to you and the car is going to pretty much take care of itself. It won't let you wander out of the lane. It'll speed you up and slow you down. It'll do all that fine. But in a confined urban environment, I can think of weather, lights burned out at an intersection, an animal, a dog, a puppy. I can see all sorts of, maybe the plaintiff's bar would love that. They would criticize your software. I think it's a ways off, let me put it that way. I think it's going to have to be another generation before that comes.
Let's squeeze in a cafe question, too, since we're in Washington. What do you think the auto industry should do at the midterm review in 2018? Is it an opportunity to weaken the 54.5 standard?
Well, I was pretty involved in the new cafe standards because I thought previous senior executives weren't actively engaged enough. Little things came out. For example, we produce trucks. Well, Hyundai didn't. But when we looked at our combined fleet, it included trucks. And I grew up in a rural area in Minnesota where dual-axled trucks, you needed heavy-duty trucks that don't make 25 miles a gallon, but you haul in heavy equipment and livestock. So we were serving a market that some of our competitors didn't. So one of the things we wanted was to bifurcate trucks, have a new separate requirement, and cars. Level the playing field. Because some don't want to play in the market across the board that we serve, Ford serves, Chrysler serves, and so does Toyota and Nissan to a certain degree. The second thing was, believe it or not, in this country, if you produced 24,999 of a specific Mercedes or BMW, you didn't have to pay the guzzler tax if you had bad mileage. What does Mercedes and BMW need an advantage in our home market? We don't get it in Europe. That was eliminated. So CAFE standards, and the other thing is, we've got a bunch of political scientists versus physical scientists determining what an engine can do. This is some high-end thermodynamics and engineering. So we asked for a midterm review to see if the physical science kept up with the political science instead of just mandating out the 2024, 2025 and just waking up in 2022, 2023 and saying, oh my God, we have a problem. We wanted to be part of a constructive solution, said let's do a midpoint check. It's not an opportunity to renegotiate, it's to see if the science, the real science, kept up with the political science. And I think that's a responsible industry perspective to take and one that I was glad to see that our regulators agreed with.
We are almost out of time, but before asking one last question, I've got a couple of housekeeping matters to take care of. First of all, I'd like to remind you about our upcoming speakers. On December 19th, we have Ricky Skaggs, Grammy winner and bluegrass legend. On January 7th, General Ray Odierno, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. And on January 9th, General Frank J. Grass, Chief of the National Guard. Secondly, I would like to present our guest with the traditional National Press Club coffee mug. You're welcome.
I don't drink coffee, but I'll try.
It's suitable for other beverages, too. And one last question. A month from now, when you are in the private sector, what's the first car you're going to buy?
Well, I think I am in the private sector. But I'll only buy a GM car. Then I'll check with my wife first.
Politic answer. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Akerson, for coming today. How about a round of applause? I'd also like to thank our National Press Club staff, including our Journalism Institute and Broadcast Center staff for helping organize today's event. Finally, here's a reminder, you can find more information about the National Press Club, including a transcript of today's event, on our website at www.press.org. Thank you, We are adjourned. Thank you. Motor trend. Before joining GM, Mr. Akerson was a managing director and head of global buyout for the Carlyle Group here in Washington, and served as CEO or president of several telecommunications and technology companies, including MCI, Nextel Communications, XO Communications, and General Instrument. Please join me in giving a warm National Press Club welcome to General Motors Chairman and CEO Dan Akerson.
Thank you, Angela. And many thanks to the National Press Club for inviting me to speak. This is an auspicious time to speak to an audience of reporters. As you may have heard, GM's been in the news a lot lately. Last week, the transformation of passed two important major milestones. First, as Angela mentioned, the United States Treasury sold its last share of General Motors stock, closing a remarkable 5-year chapter in American business history. That got
putting an American automaker on top for the first time in 27 years. GM Cars and Trucks have won accolades from Consumer Reports and Motor Chief for the Buffalo News and a former National Press Club president. Nairi Wright, Senior Vice President at MSL Group. John Hughes, Editor at Bloomberg's First Word and the Treasurer of the National Press Club. Michael Lindenberger, Washington Correspondent for the Dallas Morning News. And good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Angela Greiling-Keene. I'm a reporter for Bloomberg News and the 106th president of the National Press Club. We are the world's leading professional organization for journalists, committed to our profession's future with programming such as this, while fostering a free press worldwide. For more information about the National Press Club, please visit our website at www.press.org. To donate to programs offered to the public through our National Press Club Journalism Institute, please visit press.org/institute. On behalf of our members worldwide, I would like to welcome our speaker today, as well as those of you in our audience. Our head table includes guests of our speaker, as well as working journalists who are club members. And if you hear applause in our audience, I'd note that members of the general public are also attending, so it's not necessarily evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences. You can follow the action today on Twitter using the hashtag NPCLunch. After our guest speech concludes, we'll have a question and answer period. I will ask as many questions as time permits. Now it's time to introduce our head table. I would ask each of you to stand briefly as your name is announced. From your right, William Wilkins, Executive Director of TRIP, the Road Information Program. Marilyn Giwax, Senior Business Editor for NPR and a member of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Thomas Burr, Washington Correspondent for the Salt Lake Tribune and the Chairman of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Gabe Nelson, Washington Correspondent for Automotive News. David Shepardson, Washington Bureau Chief for the Detroit News. Selim Bingle, General Motors Vice President of Global Communications and Public Policy. Allison Fitzgerald, Finance and Investigative Reporter at the Center for Public Integrity and the Chairwoman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee. Skipping over our speaker for just a moment, Danny Selnick, Vice President at Business Wire and the member of the Speakers Committee who organized today's lunch. Thank you, Danny. Thank you. Jerry Zremski, Washington Bureau